Hello, everybody. This is Jim Rose with NorCal Slot Car Scene, and today I have a special guest, Ed Shore. I've met Ed. He goes by Ed or Eddie, and I met him about a year ago at the Christmas Enduro for the first time. And when I was researching Electric Dreams Racing, I was looking at the Far Out Club and kind of who were the fast guys, and his name was always up there. So I go down to the Electric Dreams Enduro. I know what the bar is, so. He's a very good racer. He finished second overall in the Electric Dreams overall championship standings this year. So I'd like to introduce Ed Shore.
Thank you much for having me.
So the first question, obviously, we're kind of in the same age group, and so we started playing with these toy cars in the '60s. So how did you get started in slot cars and just in general?
Yeah, it was, and I kind of repeating for anybody that has seen the book that I just put out. What I was doing was I was ditching Hebrew school. It was on I forget which day of the week it was, but I was riding my bike around, and because I think I was 12 years old, and I saw a sign in front of a hobby store that said something like model car racing or slot car racing. So I basically went in there as a place to kind of hide out. And that was when I first saw my first slot cars. It was in about 1963. It was a time where it was really booming in Southern California. And that track was probably about 5 miles from my house. And within months, I think they opened a track just 2 blocks from my house. So I just started racing at that point when I was 12 years old. One of
Well,
the local
yeah,
places.
I remember back in that time, it was kind of like Starbucks. There was a slot car track, seems like on every corner. And just like I think drag racing and a lot of the hot rodding, it really took hold in Southern California. And Ed lives in Southern California. But that was really the start of it.
Stingray bicycles, skateboards, and slot car racing. That was pretty much, the picture of my youth, I think. And you're right. There were so many shops around. I mean, there were probably, I could think of about 4 shops that were within a few miles that had opened up. And I started just going to my local shop, but then little by little, I started meeting people that were introducing me to going to other shops. And I ended up going to a place. It was about maybe 8 miles from my house. And that's when I started racing kind of competitively and formed our own Team Bula, which is still existing low these many years.
So how did
And
that start? How did the team, and who were the members of the Team Bula?
yeah, there was Gil Gunderson, who's a pretty well-known racer. He's raced continually. I think he maybe took a couple of years out for some RC racing, but Gil's about 9 years older than I am, and I'm 71 now. And Gil had a driver's license. I think I was maybe 14 or 15 at the time. So there was Gil Gunderson, Bill Gosma, and another friend named Dave Galicchio, who passed away long ago from a hang gliding accident. And the four of us were just kind of this ragtag team of racers that had no sponsorship. And we just thought the fast guys all have a team name. So we banded together and started hitting all the local raceways. And we did pretty well. We were kind of serious at a second tier level. And we were able to pop into stores and walk away with all of us on the podium and walk away with gift certificates and prizes. So that's what enabled me to keep racing, because I really didn't have money at the time, just a kid without money. So
I know
that's
that
how
one.
it got funded.
So I'm assuming then you raced with some of the people that will be a little bit more well known throughout the slot car racing, like the Stubies and the Zukerses and those people.
Exactly. And once we started, expanding our range, that's how I really got to know Southern California. Is we'd go and find these places like J&J in Long Beach and Classic Speedway that was in Santa Monica and the Big A in Anaheim. And I can't even remember all the names of them, but we would hit all these places, and a lot of the pros at the time were racing there. So I did get to know John Zukers and Mike Stubbe and Brian Warmack and John Anderson, who goes by Tori now, and Lee Hines, just all those guys, Keith Tanaka. I got to meet them. I knew some of them better than the others. And they would help me out, look at my cars, give me some castaway parts, stuff like that. I was a couple of years younger than they were, but I befriended them. I think they could see that I could drive, and they were happy to help me. And that was kind of part of my growing up.
Yeah, I was kind of into HO racing back then and really never got into 24 scale, but I knew some of the people that did. And the guys from Northern California would always come down to Southern California and try to beat, because like I said, Southern California was typically, not always, but ahead of the curve in terms of the technology, because a lot of the manufacturers were down there as well.
Right.
And the people that I know, people like Fred Hood, Jim and Gary, the Gary brothers, and so they would come down, and the Southern California guys would come up and race in Northern California. So it became a really kind of an intense rivalry, and that transitioned into RC racing, which is how I got into it. I don't,
Hmm.
Jim and Gary and Fred Hood?
I know Fred. I don't know Jim McGeary. Unless he does he. That's not Mike. No, I'm thinking of Mike, whose last name is Aguirre. No, I know Fred.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I've met him.
Fred's still hanging out, and like I said, I met Ed through the 32nd scale racing at Electric Dreams. We got Fred out to race 30. Well, not to race. He came out and practiced,
Uh-huh.
and he came out and practiced with us. So hopefully, we're going to get him out to race one of these
That'd
races
be great.
in
Well,
California.
you guys had the motor builders. You had Lenz, you had Mura
Yeah.
up there in the Bay Area. We had Thorpe, and Thorpe was actually in the San Gabriel Valley, which is where I was living at the time. And Thorpe gave me a motor or two, from what I remember. And he was he was the guy that was the balancer for everybody that was making motors and winding motors in Southern California at the time. And so for me, the end of my racing was 1968, and it actually ended at Rolling Hills Raceway when somebody stole my box with my cars and controller.
Well,
And
that stuff's still happening today, unfortunately. But yeah.
so that was just at that point. I was already kind of looking at other things to get out of racing, other interests, and I just thought, I'm not going to start reinvesting in this now. So that
So,
was the
well,
end.
all those memories and everything you experienced kind of transitions to what I really wanted to talk about on this video. Is Ed's written a book. I'll put the links up on it now and later in the video towards the end, but you can get it on Amazon. I haven't got one yet. I'm going to order one, but I have seen it, and it's just an amazing book. So just tell us how that evolved, or how you started the project.
Yeah, I have this kind of unusual master's degree in popular culture studies. It's one school in the U.S. that offers a degree in popular culture at a master's level. And I was living in Japan, and I came back because they offered me a scholarship to study actually popular culture, but they wanted somebody to do some international popular culture studies. So I started doing some papers on Japanese detective fiction and Japanese coffee houses and things such as that. And they had a national conference that would have 2,000 participants, and they'd pick a large city to do it in. So I went to one that was in Montreal and one that was in Kentucky, I believe. And so some things like that. And then I took a break from that many years. And when I got back into slot car racing, I thought, this would be a really good fit to be able to do a paper about slot car racing. And so I looked up to see if they were still going on. I saw they were having a conference in San Francisco. I wrote a proposal to get on the vehicles panel, and I got accepted to do this presentation. And my approach then was, I'd been back racing for about 2 years, and I noticed that a lot of the guys that I raced with that I've mentioned, like Stubby and Zukers and Warmack, they were back racing again, except they were all grown up and some retired. And so I started racing myself also at Buena Park Raceway, and they started what they called retro racing, which was D3, known as D3 at the time. And I just decided to write a paper talking about how these guys were back racing again 40 years later, after not doing it for so many years. They were at the top of their game when they were teenagers, and turning 20s, and all of a sudden there they were again, leading the charge. They all could still drive excellently. Brian probably drives better now than he did when he was a kid, Brian Warmack. And it just was a great way to reconnect with something that we were all pretty good at doing, that we gave us a lot of confidence when we were young. It was just a perfect setup. So I ended up doing this presentation in San Francisco. And after doing the first one, I waited a few years and I got into club racing, which was 32nd scale ready to run cars. And then I thought, well, this would be an interesting paper to compare commercial racing with 32nd scale ready to run car club racing. And so I put out a survey and I did some kind of analysis, softball analysis of comparing commercial racing and club racing. And so I did that second paper, and then I waited again a year or two, and I decided it'd be fun to do one profiling collectors of slot cars. So I did a paper on that. And next year, I think I did one on builders of slot cars, tracks, bodies, that kind of thing. And did that paper, took another break, decided to do one just about 1 month of my activities in slot car racing, since people were talking about how slot cars are dead and dying. And I thought, well, I'm pretty busy doing it. Like I'm doing it every day, all the time. So I decided to just make a list of 50 activities that I did in the month of January of 2020. And I called it 50 Shades of Slot Car Racing. And that became another presentation and another chapter. And the last one I did was I jumped panels from the vehicles panel to a panel called Happiness, where there were presentations such as, things on movies and music and meditation and health products and stuff like that. And I proposed doing one about how my hobby brings me happiness. And that was the final one. So what I did, I had these separate presentations, and each one had a PowerPoint presentation with it. So it took me a long time to decide exactly the format, because I talked to you about this at one point. My photos were really low resolution, and I didn't think they would be good enough to put into a book. And then I finally just decided that the pictures were less important. The narrative was more important. So I put those chapters together as they were, unedited, wrote an introduction and a conclusion and some updated stuff, got Howie Ursner to write a foreword for me, and paid somebody to make it look good in the format of a book. And what I did do in this one, which I think is kind of unique, is at the end of each chapter, I have the thumbnails from all of the PowerPoint presentations. So at the end of each chapter, and there is a QR code and a URL that'll take the reader to a website where they can then view the full PowerPoint presentations in regular resolution, and that's hosted on YouTube. So they're done as videos on YouTube, and I'll continue to go back and fix those and maybe add narration and subtitles and things like that. So that's the book.
When you talk about popular culture, one of the things that comes to mind to me was the first guy that I actually quote heard of as big time slot car racing was John Zukers. Mm-hmm. I never really met him. I raced a couple of races he was at, because I started racing in the D3 race, the retro racing, for a little while. And I did a video on the AFX car that just came out about a year and a half ago. And the license plate on the back was CUKRAS. Mm-hmm. And so I did a video because I didn't think people knew what that meant and what John Zukers meant to the slot car industry. But back to the popular culture, I know there's a chapter on that. I saw that because was it Car and Driver, I think, that did an actual article on him? Did that change anything in the way people looked at slot cars, do you think, when a real slot car racer was featured in a mainstream magazine?
Yeah, I don't know, because I'm really far more of a slot car racer than a one-to-one car aficionado. So like a lot of times I hear so many of my slot car friends talking about F1 racing and the Can-Am racing that's going on. And I know very little about one-to-one car racing. So I'm not really sure how much that affected things. But I can tell you that whether it was the magazine or just what was going on at the time, but John kind of had like rock star status. I mean, he'd come in and it was almost like, people would part when he'd come in, and he had a real persona, real personality. And I think he just attracted a lot of attention. One little story, if I can quickly tell it, that I mentioned in the first chapter here is when I must have been 15 or 16 years old. and we were at a big race, and I knew John already just from being around stuff, and he came up to me and said, "Hey, we're going to have a big race in Atlanta. Do you want to be on team champion with us and go to Atlanta and race?" And I just thought, what? John asked me to join team champion, so I
I've
went
made it.
home.
I've made it.
Right, I was super excited. I went home and told my parents, "I'm going to Atlanta," and they just said, "You are not going to Atlanta," and they didn't let me go. It was
Wow.
just, yeah, it was like a
How old were
just.
you then? How old were you
I
then?
think I was maybe 16.
Okay.
Yeah, probably 16 at the time. But they were, I was old enough to really want to go, but too young to be able to just go off and do it. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
are there any other chapters or people or characters in the book that you'd like to talk about, or come out like this was one of my favorites or whatever?
Well, I really admire and almost dedicate the book to Gil Gunderson, who is somebody that he's kept the name Team Bua alive forever. I don't know if you've heard the name, but there's a race that still continues called the Bula Bash that's
I've heard
named
of that.
after
Yeah, I've
our.
heard of that.
Yeah, that's named after our team. We just started this team and just picked the name out of after a radio jingle, and the name is just stuck. And I keep running into people who have been on Team Bula throughout the years in the '80s, the '90s, the 2000s, and it's just because Gil, we kept the name alive. At one point, they were producing some products at a very low key level, but I remember just recently in the last Bula Bash, Charlie Nelson, who also raced in the '60s, he picked the name Team Bula to use at the last Bula Bash. And then he messaged me right away and said, "Hey, Eddie, do you mind that I picked Team Bula?" He says, I thought I should have cleared it with you first. And I said, no, that's fine. I said, Team Bula is open to anybody. Anybody can be on Team Bula. And then Ray Livanos, who's on the team, he messaged me and said, maybe you didn't know this, but I was on Team Bula in the '90s, and he was on that team with Charlie. So I thought that was kind of full circle. So, Gil is somebody that I really admired. I feel like there's people you grow up that, I was not into school at all. I was into slot car racing, and Gil, being 9 years older than me, was just somebody that acted as a mentor. He just helped me to grow up and learn things like, we were winding armatures and learning things about gear ratios that related to math and all that kind of stuff that I had no interest in school at all, came through from these older guys that I was hanging out with.
So this book starts then basically, or not basically, but actually in the '60s and goes through the present time.
Yes, with a big 40-year gap. Yeah, that
Just a
big,
small gap in the middle. Yeah.
what I call the dark ages, right? And then so when I got back into racing, it was like 2005, the end of 2005, and at Buena Park Raceway, there was a couple of guys that started the D3 retro movement, and a couple of other guys decided to have what they called the Legends race, and they got in touch with all these guys that I've mentioned already. Pete Zimmerman was there, Lee Hines, Zukers and Stubbe and Warmack and Anderson, and all these guys were there. Gil Gunderson was there, and they invited me to be in there. And I felt kind of a little guilty. I said, well, I never really won anything back in the day. I remember I was in an amateur race and I won a $50 savings bond that I cashed the next day for like 30 some bucks because I didn't have any money. That was like, wow, okay, I'll take this. But they had this Legends race that I participated in, and I actually came in. It was like an IROC race. We all raced the same cars in all the lanes. I think I ended above mid pack in that one, so I felt like, okay, I'm going to keep doing this stuff. And what really cinched it for me was Gil at the time. This was probably 2006 or 2007. Out of the blue, he had lived in Southern California all his life. He got back in touch with an old girlfriend in high school and got married and moved to Tennessee. And as a going away present, instead of me giving him something, he gave me a slot car box, an old little Hoffman box with a bunch of tools. And I already had one car, and that kind of cinched it for me to get back into it and stay with it.
How do you compare? Because I know how I compare it, but racing very serious 24 scale commercial tracks versus what we have now at Electric Dreams and more of a home track feel, even though it's at a commercial location. And to
Yeah.
me, now it's more fun than ever.
Yeah, I have to say Electric Dreams is far more like our 24 scale commercial racing than what I had been used to, which is the Far Out Club, which really has a goal of running things very close to out of the box. We do some minor tuning, we true our tires, that kind of stuff. We have some really basic rules that are mandatory tires or a mandatory motor. But Electric Dreams, it's just far more open-ended as far as high-end tuning. We're using like racing parts, highly competitive racing parts. So in that way, I really think the Electric Dreams racing is pretty much similar to the commercial racing. I guess the one difference being the commercial racing, these guys are still experimenting with a lot of chassis building that's very different. And we're really not doing any building of chassis, but as you know, we're doing a lot of testing and choosing between four different strengths or stiffnesses of chassis and pods and suspensions in some classes and all of that kind of stuff. So in some ways, we're in our Electric Dreams racing, we're choosing from a much wider range of available set stuff. Where in commercial racing, there are set rules as far as the dimensions of the cars, the tires, the chassis clearance, and the materials that can be used. I think it's still limited to brass and brass rod and piano wire. I don't think you're allowed to put together a steel chassis and run it in a retro race, for example. So in that way, I think they're much closer than they were. I think in terms of money, it's probably also getting much closer to what it was. It used 32nd scale, at least in the Far Out Club, it's very inexpensive. You're running pretty close to out of the box. Electric Dreams, it costs you some money if you want to be competitive.
It's definitely a much more competitive, and not in a bad way. It's just different.
Yeah.
So we're trying in Northern California. We're working through that. Some people don't want to go to the commercial style tracks. Some people want to just stay at the home tracks. How to get both parties to come together. Maybe it's not possible because just a little mindset. And some people love the competition, and some people just want to race scale looking cars. So.
And some people absolutely love the process of tinkering.
Yeah.
I mean, they love that much more than the racing. I am clearly I'm a driver, not a tinkerer, and I would much prefer. I wish I had a pit crew. Honestly, I wish I could just show up at the track, look over the car, tighten the wheels and the gears, and make sure that it's all right. But somebody else make it go fast. And I've been very lucky in my racing. Whether it's actually at Electric Dreams with Rick Jocham and Walt Baines, going over my cars, even though they are my competitors there. Rick tells me, I don't want you to run a crap car. I want you to run a good car, so I have some competition on the track. And he's right, because he's such a good driver. When I do 24 scale racing, I get a lot of help there, whether it's Mill Conroy gives me a lot of help, Sam Rackham gives me a lot of help, just whoever's around there. I do rely on these guys. I don't have the best vision for close-up vision. I've had this macular hole. I've got one left eye that barely works, and my right eye has a macular hole that developed in there. So when I look at something really close, I'm like half of it's kind of missing when I look at really close-up stuff. So I'm kind of screwed, as far as the vision goes. Fortunately, it doesn't affect my driving on the track, and that's something that's been good. So I do definitely rely on these guys to help me get my cars together, get them tuned up, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a really nice community of guys like that.
It really is. And I've known Rick for 10 or 12 years racing HO, and just got acquainted with Walt in the last year, and they've been very helpful. The racing is great. I really enjoy the 32nd scale racing, especially coming down there. But let's go back to the book again.
Sure.
Was that easy to do in terms of, obviously it was self-published, I assume?
Yes, on Amazon.
And so that's something that, well,
anybody can do.
Theoretically, anybody can do it. It does take a lot of time, effort, and talent to put something like that together, especially time, I'm sure.
Yeah, I was lucky in that the papers were done. Like I said, I didn't go back and I didn't re-edit the papers at all. I really just thought that would be a road I didn't want to go down. I thought if I start editing the papers, it's just going to create way too much work for myself. So there is a little bit of repetition in the early chapters because each one is a separate presentation, and I have to start off by saying, what is a slot car? And that kind of thing, maybe telling a little bit of how I got into it. But then I think the later chapters, I think, were pretty much standalone. So in terms of the work, the main chapters or presentations were already done with the PowerPoints. So I really just needed to find somebody that could lay it out for me. And I was really lucky that I found somebody who was really good. And then it was just a matter of, paying the money to have somebody lay it out. And it took just about 2 weeks of, being on the phone a lot or on the computer a lot, exchanging ideas with the guy and making corrections, going back and forth. And I thought he did a really great job. I'm super pleased with how it came out because it could have been a disaster in the look. And I think I would not have been so proud to shop it around and be on here talking about it. But the way it is, I'm really proud of how it came out, and I'm happy that it's available.
Well, I think it's something that anybody that lived this, basically people in our age, as well as people that are younger, but people in our age lived this era. And I highly recommend them going on to Amazon and purchasing it because, one, it's not terribly expensive, and it's great. It's a personal book as opposed to a commercial book, if there's a distinction there.
I consider it more, it's really more of like a personal memoir about my life in slot car racing. And it happens to have history involved and personalities involved that I mention, that I talk about, but it's not like a book like Philippe de L'Espinaise, which is really an overall history of slot car with super detailed. It's not that at all. It's really much more of a personal take on it. And I think it is really very readable. Marco made me a pretty nice compliment. He said it just sounds exactly like you. And I thought, that's good. Perfect.
I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
One last question on the book.
Sure.
It's slot car racing in popular culture. How has this been received in your peer group among people that have no idea what a slot car is? Maybe they know what it is, but they've never done it. Has it been received well in that?
I don't know. Because I don't know. I've kind of, in a way, I've warned my non-slot car racing friends away from it. I've said, look, I think it's really something more for slot car racers, or maybe for somebody that's got an anthropological mindset that wants to learn about a crazy little subculture. But other than that, I have not really encouraged non-slot car racers to look at it. Maybe that's a faulty assumption, but so I really don't know.
Well, I think people that are seeing this video are all slot car people, pretty much. Right. But people that are not slot car people, like you say, if they're interested in looking at this phenomenon that happened, would enjoy reading it. So
I think so. I think so.
I recommend it to everybody.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I recommend it to all slot car racers, certainly.
Well, and it's not selling in the millions, but it's selling. I saw on Amazon that it's actually selling fairly well. I'm not sure if you had any aspirations of what the numbers would be, but I think it's selling well.
It's kind of a funny thing. This is the absolute truth. I did not think for a second beyond getting it done. And actually, when it started to sell, I realized, oh wow, I have to maybe talk about it or be concerned with how much to price it for, and all that kind of stuff. It just is something I didn't give any thought to at all. So I've been quite pleased to see that a few copies have sold in Italy and in the Netherlands and in Australia, awesome. and in the UK. Quite a few have sold there. So it's still just a little over 100 that have sold so far in about 2 weeks' time that it's been available. But yeah, I'm very pleased with the reception so far among slot car racers. I got 2 very good reviews that are posted on Amazon. I welcome anybody that does get the book to write a review, good or bad. Be happy to see the reviews up there.
Sounds great. Would you hold the book up again and
sure,
show everybody? So
that's
again,
the cover.
Slot car racing in popular culture.
And this is on the back. I'll just put it up there. It's that's Piranha Speedway and Hobbies, our most recent commercial raceway that is in Whittier, California. and it's got a few nice pictures in there, here and there. This is a picture of what the thumbnails look like. Let me get this one open. So at the end of every chapter, there's thumbnails, and as I mentioned, then the URL or a QR code will take you from there to a computer or your phone, where you can then look at all the slides, that kind
So
of
it's a
thing.
21st century interactive book.
It's a hybrid.
Whoever thought we'd be doing stuff like that? So
Yeah, no kidding, no kidding.
well, Ed, it's been great, meeting you in the last year and racing with you and beating you once or twice.
Yep. With my own car, I want to say.
I should know. You brought that up. I didn't mention that, but yeah, Ed loaned me a Revo slot car at one of the races, and I think I finished second. And
Yep.
so yeah,
I didn't finish
and
second.
that, well, I wasn't going to say that, but that's the camaraderie that we have in this sport. That I didn't have a Revo slot. I went down there for another race. Oh, here, borrow mine, and so that happens all the time. We have loaner cars available in our local races and so on. So I thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. I
being a new friend of mine.
Looking forward to racing with you many times in the future. Really, and thank you very much for having me on here.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Ed.
Okay, take care. Bye.